Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, February 1st, 2018. Happy February to all of those who are glad that we made it to another month without being destroyed in a nuclear holocaust. And, well, you know, sad February to those who wish it would just come already, or maybe the giant meteor would take us out. What a day. Another amazing news day. I think, by the way, over at the White House, President Trump is tweeting again. I think we were right. I think there was a conscious decision made to keep him more or less off of Twitter in the run-up to the State of the Union, and they probably also advised him, why don't you mostly stay off of Twitter for 24 hours or so following the State of the Union address and give the press the opportunity to run he read from the teleprompter and didn't light anything on fire, and so therefore was presidential spin. Once you have pocketed as much of that spin as you are going to get, anyway, as much as you might be entitled to, in your mind, out of the trade press, then you've locked it in. The headlines are printed. Then go for it. Get back on Twitter, and I think that worked pretty well. He didn't get all of the presidential accolades, and there's a pivot. We haven't gone full pivot on this thing so far. But I think he squeezed the best headlines he could out of the State of the Union, locked them in place, was laying low and quiet for a day, and now is back with a vengeance this morning, tweeting, of course, that this State of the Union address was the most watched in history, the history of China, or the whole entire world, the biggest television event ever, etc. Well, I think he only managed to claim that it was the most watched State of the Union ever. And, Google being what it is, people were able to check that, and were very quickly, of course, rejecting that as untrue. There were plenty of State of the Union addresses that had larger viewership according to the Nielsen ratings or whatever. But, no surprise. What did he claimed something in the neighborhood of 45 million viewers. There's been, I think, Clinton hit 45, Obama 48. People quoted various figures. Or I guess I should say it's probably the same figures being quoted by various people. 51.8 million viewing one of the George W. Bush State of the Union addresses, too. None of them were me, of course, so it doesn't matter that much from my point of view. But, of course, once again, out there just insisting, yeah, you bet, I'm the most fantastic guy ever, and easily disproved. And I don't know, I guess every time this happens, a few more people wake up to the fact that this is habitual for him. A few more people, I wonder whether as many people go out the other side of the room, too. Like, for all the people we welcome to the tent saying, oh my gosh, yeah, you know what, we should just say he's a liar, he's a habitual liar. Perhaps as many people just roll their eyes and say, you know what, that's just the way he is at this point, and I don't care anymore. I mean, I know there are even avid foes of Donald Trump who, for instance, get frustrated with me or anybody else for bothering to stop and offhandedly tweet about the fact that he's a giant liar and that he's lied again. And they say, listen. As a matter of fact, do both. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. We'll call that chalking. I don't know, but don't bother with the lies. Focus on the criminality. And, I understand the sentiment, but to me, obviously, they'll go hand in hand, especially when one of the criminal acts is obstruction of justice. There's really not much opportunity to ignore the lies if they are essential to the obstruction of justice. And, of course, when you finally do get others to focus on the criminality, you will be glad that the lies were documented and commonly accepted as indisputably so. They've indisputably happened. They were indisputably lies, and everybody agrees to say that they were. And there's no controversy or dispute about that. It will make the prosecution of the criminality that much easier. There's a ton of stuff today. Greg's here. Let's just kick it off. I have to assume I know where we're going, at least in terms of headlines. Maybe I'm wrong. Prove me wrong, Greg, or prove, you know what, prove him wrong. Donald Trump. Good morning. How you doing?
I suppose we could. I mean,
what's the point?
Let's start off with that little tweet of Donald J. Trump's.
Okay.
Thank you for all the nice compliments and reviews on the State of the Union speech. 45.6 million people watched, the highest number in history.
Yes. I mean,
and then he goes on to say Fox News had the biggest ratings, which they did. But as Philip Bunt points out, people are really misreading this as a claim that the ratings are the highest. What he's saying is, in history, mathematicians have never identified a number higher than 45.6 million.
That could be.
Which,
Not even
by
in
the
China.
way, is completely false because to invoke George W. Bush, there's a Google, which is a lot more, and also there's a Brazilian.
That's true. How many troops in a Brazilian?
Yeah, well, So the whole idea really here isn't that Trump said something stupid and demonstrably untrue. The question is the White House going to defend it the way they did, with the inauguration numbers, especially knowing that Obama had a higher number? So is Sean Spicer going to come out of retirement and, debase himself again? Or are they just going to have one of the in-house people do it?
Wasn't he just the other day speaking somewhere and saying, yeah, I'm really kind of actually embarrassed about having done all that stuff.
He's embarrassed about embarrassing himself.
Oh, I see. But not embarrassed about having insisted that the inauguration crowd was the biggest ever? Is that,
well,
did
that
he
was
not?
one of the ways that he embarrassed himself, and he's sort of sorry he did that, and he's going to have to live it down forever. And I'm reading that, and just as I read that, I see a tweet by Reince Priebus, Priebus come by, and it says, that was the greatest speech I ever heard in anywhere in the history of the universe. And I'm thinking, oh God, are they at this? This is all about a very weak president whose ego needs to be stoked. Everybody knows that, and so they do it in public in order to curry some kind of favor, so they don't get their butt fired, basically.
But Priebus, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure what his thinking is, but he's got no reason anymore, but whatever. Sean Spicer, I hope you've stopped eating gum. That would be great, probably for your health. I'm being generous. Good health to you. Anyway, I don't even know where to start, so I'm just going to let you continue. How about that?
Okay. I think today's going to be like one of the stupidest days in the history of all of hyperbolic discussions.
Oh, yeah, right. Sure. What a liar. All right.
And, of course, it has to do with the release of the memo, the thing, the MacGuffin, the whatever it is you want to call it. Olive Pundit had a great tweet this morning. He said, what happens today, he said this yesterday, tomorrow, Trump fires Rosenstein, Gowdy turns on Nunes, Sessions challenges Comey to a duel, Andrew McCabe and Peter Strzok embark on a madcap buddy road trip.
This is all possible.
It is. I mean, and the name for that, of course, is Thursday.
Yeah.
So
but if
you
it happens
have the
tomorrow,
FBI going on record saying they have, grievous misgivings, great misgivings about the release of this.
Yes.
And we know that basically Nunes works for Trump, and despite the separation of powers in the Constitution, is essentially an executive employee that's working in the legislative branch to undermine what the legislative branch is trying to do.
Yes.
We know that, but what's fascinating about it is that there's buy-in from the rest of the Republicans to go along with this. So when this happens, not if, but when the memo is released, whenever that is, whether it was changed after the committee agreed to do it over Adam Schiff's and the Democrats' objections, or whether it was just changed for minor things, as they claim, doesn't matter. At some point it's going to be released. And after that happens, is Christopher Wray going to resign? Because Wray was the one who basically said it was okay for the FBI to release the statement about the misgivings. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, and if that's his position, how does he stay in his job?
I don't know, unless, of course, he didn't really care one way or the other, but was directed by the White House to issue a objection that they were going to ignore for the sake of appearing to be objective in directing the investigation. I don't know.
Why would you have to bring up a conspiracy theory when we have what's actually going on now, which is a fantastic conspiracy theory?
I don't know. Maybe it's because Christopher Wray has acted under direction from the White House from day one, and I thought he might do it on day 19 also.
Well, that might be true. It's really hard to know exactly what it is that they're trying to do, except that they assume correctly that Republicans in Congress, and especially House Republicans, are so stupid that they'll buy anything.
Maybe. One other thing on Wray. I would say is, I guess he might resign if he's asked to resign by Trump. And I guess the reason I actually think, all right, well, you have to remain open.
Rosenstein's the bigger player.
Well, yeah, but you got to remain open to the possibility that this was engineered, just because ordinarily, had Wray issued that statement in good faith, entirely independently, and in disagreement with Trump, Trump would be in such a rage that there would be nothing left for Wray to do but resign, because he would be about to be fired. And I have yet to see that. And I can't imagine issuing a memo in defiance of the president's position and not enraging him to the point where he was ready to fire you, other than, he said, well, I don't know how many of these directors can I fire, but I don't think he's concerned about those optics. But so far I haven't seen it, so I'm open to the possibility that he was asked to do that. We'll wait.
So hard to know. It is so hard to know. Not that you're wrong. It's hard to know. I guess we're going to have to see it play out. There's two interesting pieces I thought on this. One is from the New York Times. Charlie Savage is a very good piece. The real aim of the Nunes memo is the Mueller investigation.
Yes.
And as a matter of political reality, he writes, the memo, written by Republican staffers for Representative Devin Nunes of California, the House Intelligence Committee chairman, has everything to do with defending President Trump from Mr. Mueller's investigation. The memo is the latest salvo. Led by Mr. Nunes, the House Intelligence Committee is pivoting from examining Russia's election meddling to instead investigating FBI and Justice Department officials connected to the inquiry, putting them, with Mr. Ryan's clear blessing, very important to write that, at the forefront of the broader pushback. Ryan is part of this.
Yeah.
Nunes, Ryan, we're happy that Trey Gowdy is retiring, because he's a partisan hack responsible for the Benghazi Nothing Burger. But Nunes, Gowdy, who is the only other person on the committee who has actually seen the underlying intelligence, along with Adam Schiff.
Yes.
Who voted to let this happen. All this is being done at Paul Ryan's behest and blessing. So Ryan is endorsing this, regardless of any mealy-mouthed thing he may say about it. And you have a bunch of people on the Republican side who basically are trying to run cover for Trump because they're trying to save their own butts in November's election. And that's what this comes down to. And, the fact that Ryan is sometimes seen as I'm just going to step back and let things happen. It's really not up to me. Trump is Trump. I can't be responsible for things that he's totally responsible for what's going on here, because he's the one that's allowing this to happen. In any case, that's why I'm glad that Charlie Savage mentioned Ryan's clear blessing. Republicans are pushing the narrative that a cabal of politically biased law enforcement officials set out to sabotage Mr. Trump. That's a bunch of nonsense, but that's what they're pushing. And they're portraying a dossier written by Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence agent, which laid out unverified claims that Russia had compromised Mr. Trump and was conspiring with him, as the fountainhead of the Russia investigation. That assertion disregards unrelated evidence that Russia sought to influence the election, the pattern of contacts between Russians and Mr. Trump's associates. You can lay out in detail those other things. It's an extensive non-Christopher Steele dossier. And Mr. Nunes' 3.5-page memo bolsters conservative storyline. According to people who read it, the memo centers on a fall 2016 application for a wiretap order targeting Carter Page. Now, there's two important points, again, Philip Bump brings up. One is that Carter Page had been under suspicion for 3 years prior to this. And number two, at the time, there was a wiretap order targeting Carter Page, which I guess was a reorder or a re-up of something, a renewal of something already happening. At that point, Page wasn't part of the campaign.
Yeah.
So the idea that the campaign was being targeted because Carter Page is involved is kind of dumb.
Well,
and the idea that they're going to hang the whole entire conspiracy theory around poor Carter Page is really kind of remarkable.
Yeah. The Carter Page story with respect to when he was and wasn't on the campaign is something that's been unclear the whole time anyway. And the Trump team seems to claim one or the other or sometimes both, depending on what they need for that set of facts. When they need him to be a member of the campaign, and so it's okay that he did X, Y, Z,
well,
he's on.
Basically, yes. I never really met Mike Pence, and I never spoke to him. And in any case, I don't even know who he is.
Right. But yeah, the Charlie Savage article, and the Ryan is complicit in all of it beat, something Joan brought up yesterday, and I think she's kind of making it her own part of yet another beat for Joan to follow. Trying to make sure that people don't forget Ryan's role in it and Savage's.
No, and that's wonderful. We've been beating on it for a week,
yeah.
And I think it's important.
It is.
Democrats on the committee produced their own classified memo. They said pointed out and explained inaccuracies in the Republican memo. Asked on Tuesday about why it would not be more appropriate to make both memos public at the same time, Mr. Ryan was evasive. He said the Democratic memo first had to go through a process in which House members outside the Intelligence Committee could read it. Pressed on why the Republican memo shouldn't be held back until the process was done, he said a reporter had asked enough questions, and then let's turn to another reporter.
Isn't that amazing? And,
well, no, it's not amazing, because if you go look at the transcript of this committee when they were discussing what was going on and how this would all work, when Mike Quigley started to ask questions of Devin Nunes as to, are you working with the White House? You're recused. Is your staff working with the White House? A very important question. Yes. Are you coordinating this in any way with the White House? Do you have anything to do with the White House in regard to this memo? You know what Nunes' answer was? Your time's up. Let's move on to some other questions. I mean, this is a standard thing, which, by the way, again, pointing out David Waldman's observation that who holds the gavel is hugely important. Here's yet another example of that. Your time is up. I don't need to answer that. Let's move on.
Pretty much. And there's a couple other examples of the same thing also floating around this same issue. I'll let you continue to roll because there's just so much that we'll peel off and take the details one by one later on.
Yeah, Mr. Ryan then began. I mean, a lot of this piece here is about Mr. Ryan, so that's why I'm so happy that it's actually getting out there in the paper of record. Mr. Ryan then began remarks he said he had prepared, stressing he respected the FBI, said the Justice Department as important institutions for keeping the rule of law intact. But on Monday, Intelligence Committee Republicans signaled a widening attack on both institutions, that is to say FBI and Justice Department, informing Democrats that the committee had opened an investigation into them, according to Mr. Schiff, as they voted to make the memo public. Of particular importance, the Republican memo set to cite the role of Rod J. Rosenstein.
Yes.
Not Rodney. It's Rod. Rod J. Rosenstein.
Roderick. I don't know.
I'm
guessing not.
Baldrick. Rod J. Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General appointed by Mr. Trump last year, in signing off an application to extend the surveillance of Mr. Page, because he was already under surveillance. It wasn't new. Meaning he approved the resubmission of Mr. Steele's information to the court. Mr. Rosenstein's role could provide critics of the inquiry ammunition to go after him, I guess for doing his job. Under Justice Department regulations, only Mr. Rosenstein can fire Mr. Mueller, and only if he finds his special counsel has committed misconduct, something he has repeatedly said he has not seen any sign of. But if Mr. Trump were to fire Mr. Rosenstein, he could install a more accommodating replacement, willing to say he or she had spotted a reason to justify removing the special counsel and shutting down the investigation. I suppose Trey Gowdy's available.
Yes.
On Tuesday,
sort of.
When Mr. Ryan maintained there was no connection between the memo and Mr. Mueller's work, the Speaker also portrayed Mr. Nunes' committee as trying to be transparent as Donald Trump's taxes, as it carried out oversight into whether the executive branch had violated civil liberties using the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. There's a very legitimate issue here as to whether or not an American's civil liberties were violated, he said. That's the Republican talking point. I was arguing about this with Noah Rothman on Twitter this morning. He said, why aren't Democrats more enraged about what happened with Andrew McCabe, and the Comey letter, which clearly threw the election? He's right about that. And about the FISA, improprieties, the fact that FISA exists, the fact that people are unmasking Americans. Why aren't Democrats more outraged about this?
About that?
Yeah. And I said, we're seething about it. But, I said to him, you really should consider covering American politics. It's a really interesting field.
I mean, okay.
I mean, why would you bring that up now as a distraction when all this other stuff is going on?
Unmasking.
Yeah, well, where was the unmasking problem? Well, apparently Republicans have talked themselves into the idea that, and I asked them, which is the problem? That Devin Nunes' original complaint that people in the Obama administration had improperly unmasked people in the Trump camp, like Carter Page?
Yeah.
Or that there's the idea that unmasking could happen in any circumstance. Are you unhappy that people can be unmasked, or are you unhappy that the unmasking was done in a improper manner? Because the latter part has just been, that's completely been disproven. That's not even an issue. But no, to Republicans, they're both still issues. And I'm scratching my head and saying, how does that take precedence or anything over what's actually going on in terms of Nunes writing a completely bogus memo at the direction of the White House to protect Trump's butt? I mean, that's the underlying core here. What is Trump hiding, and why is he using you to hide him? And it's not that the rest of the stuff doesn't matter. Sure it does. But how are you going to get to the bottom of that with a Trey Gowdy, Devin Nunes investigation? I mean, there's so little trust from Democrats in terms of Republicans in Congress to do anything legitimate when it comes to actually getting to the bottom of this, as if they actually want to know what happened, that there's no way the House, for example, has any power to do this. Now, whether Richard Burr and the Senate, which is a little bit better, can do such a thing is an open question. And I said to him, if you really want to right the ship because you think the whole thing has gone off course, what ought to happen is that Richard Burr and Mark Warner and Adam Schiff ought to write a joint letter saying that Devin Nunes is a crock and he really shouldn't be in that position. He's a partisan hack. I mean, say it nicely if you want to, but disavow yourselves of what's happening with this memo that's going to be released today.
Yeah.
And unless that happens, I don't see why any Democrat should have any faith in what Congress is doing.
There's no real reason to. And speaking of the idea of a Nunes launched investigation, the one that you mentioned, that he took the entire committee by complete surprise with this announcement that there was even an investigation, as they were saying. Now we're going to investigate the FBI and the DOJ. And this morning, the word is from committee Democrats, there isn't actually such an investigation. It couldn't be launched without any notice whatsoever to Democrats, and B, would require process, procedure, votes, notice to the rest of the committees. Yeah, process. All of this stuff, all missing. And that, I guess, on top of Ari Melber's observation, by the way, that the alteration, whether substantive or not, the alteration of the so-called memo, and then the vote apparently held under Rule 10, House Rule 10, that being the one that gives the president 5 days to approve or disapprove of their vote to release this so-called memo, is itself now, I guess, contaminated or inapposite. They've voted to release a certain text, and that text is not what the White House is still supposedly pondering whether or not to release. There are two different texts here, and if you were talking about a bill, the law and the rules would be very clear. No, this isn't actually a bill. The president can sign it all day long. It doesn't mean anything. It wasn't passed in the same form by both houses. analogous situation here. It may require starting the process all over again, but with these guys, they may also just say, who the hell cares? The
Right,
White House is
exactly.
releasing this. It was bogus to start with, but who cares? Here it is. Boom. Goodbye. What are you going to do? You sanction me under House rules? I'm the president.
So back to the Charlie Savage article, and I like it because it covers all these things. That Mr. Nunes's actions undermined his credibility does not mean that law enforcement officials made no mistakes. The Justice Department's independent inspector general, Michael Horowitz, is finishing an inquiry into the handling of the Hillary Clinton email server investigation. And again, Democrats are still upset about that. And he is expected to deliver some harsh findings about senior Justice Department and FBI officials in the Obama administration. My conclusion is they never should have gotten involved with politics, but they did, and it threw the election, and that's a big deal. But for now, as Charlie Savage writes, Mr. Nunes's memo is coming to define a political landscape already cratered by Mr. Trump's recurring calls to reinvestigate Mrs. Clinton, his firing of the former FBI Director James Comey, the recent revelation that Mr. Trump ordered the firing of the special counsel, Senate Republicans' own attempts to discredit Mr. Steele. One potential clue to the strategy behind the Republican memo may be lurking in the broadcast of the Fox News personality Sean Hannity, a close ally of Mr. Trump whose programs often function as a conduit for his messaging. And though it was not yet public that the memo revealed Mr. Rosenstein's role in extending the surveillance, Mr. Hannity himself raised the question, did Rosenstein sign off on an extension of the FISA warrant, emphasizing I'm very interested in this, and then called for him to be fired. So as the break comes up, Hannity is telegraphing where Republicans are going with this.
Yeah.
It's a really very good article.
It really is. It covers a broad spectrum of things. Things have changed. Situation has changed on the ground since it was written, but we're catching up with all of that along the way. And he laid the groundwork for our understanding of it now that the rest of the news is breaking. I had a feeling that he actually knew that a lot of that was coming, and for some reason couldn't fit every last detail of it into his article. But Charlie Savage, among the best writers in that field, and among the people who, even in the paper of record, will make you feel like you're getting the newspaper early.
Right.
We'll come back
More
after
the break.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Believe it or not, more things are happening even as we speak, although who knows how many more things are happening as we tweet. I haven't checked the president's feed yet. This is usually this is morning hibernation time. I think we're safe. We can probably continue with your roundup, Greg.
Okay. So I have a piece here from Gary Meltz. That's over at Real Clear
What is
Politics.
he, Meltz? What?
Gary Meltz is a former press secretary for Representative Elliot Engel, a Democrat,
Okay.
and is currently the principal at Meltz Communications, a crisis and political risk management firm in Washington, D.C., which I would guess, if it's a crisis and risk management firm, probably has lots of business.
Right. Gary Meltdown, they should call it.
Exactly. Sans collusion, obstruction charge wouldn't topple Trump. And if it's too long and didn't read, his basic point here is that Democrats should temper their enthusiasm. Unless the special prosecutor can prove Trump and his inner circle conspired with the Russian government to defeat Hillary Clinton, it is highly unlikely Republicans on Capitol Hill — remember, we're talking about Republicans on Capitol Hill, not people.
Yes.
Republicans on Capitol Hill will sacrifice their president for trying to quash an investigation of a non-existent crime. Now, that's assuming that the only thing that Mueller can prove is obstruction of justice, and the rest remains murky. That is an incredibly huge assumption, because even if there isn't a conspiracy, even if there isn't what we lay people call collusion, there's the whole money laundering criminal conspiracy to launder foreign money through Trump properties.
Yes.
Which probably lies on the heart of everything he's trying to hide, which is why he never released his taxes.
Yeah.
Do we know that? No. But neither does the guy writing this article.
We know it.
So he well, don't tell everybody.
Okay, all right. So go on.
He's saying that obstruction of justice alone would make Republicans on the Hill yawn.
That is probably true. Although, I mean, they would probably do that for anything. But
the same is also true if Mueller concludes Trump obstructed justice to protect somebody else, like Flynn. Republicans wouldn't remove Donald Trump from office for that offense.
No,
fair or not, as long as the GOP controls Congress, the president's fate rests with his fellow Republicans. Mueller can't compel them to impeach and remove Trump. And since his well-received State of the Union speech this week and the recent passage of tax reform, which is a major legislative victory, the president's relationship with conservatives on the Hill has improved. They see it that way. When he says well-received State of the Union, he's talking about conservatives. Remember, he's talking about Republicans on the Hill, not people.
And don't hit him. He's talking about Republicans.
That's right. These aren't people. They're Republicans on the Hill. In recent weeks, mainstream Republicans have been more vocal in their defense of Trump. Graham, Grassley have sent a highly unusual letter to the Department of Justice urging a criminal investigation of the author of the dossier. The document made many highly charged claims. Moreover, multiple Republican-led investigations in Congress about Russian interference have seemingly veered off track, as in the memo that we're talking about today. Nunes' strategy to muddy the political waters has grown so intense, a Republican appointee at the Justice Department recently wrote to the representative saying it would be extraordinarily reckless, that's the words they used, for Nunes to release a classified memo that purportedly proves the Obama administration was spying on the Trump campaign.
Time out for just a second. Was extraordinarily reckless? Did they use extraordinarily? But I know reckless was certainly.
Yeah, that's it's in quotes. Extraordinarily reckless.
But all right, I'm wondering was that not like the heart of the Comey letter about Clinton?
Yeah.
Oh, so same thing, but his email. All right, go on.
According to the Washington Post, the memo is now the subject of an active social media campaign. Released the memo, led in part by Russian-related Twitter accounts. In fact, it now appears that after a party-line vote in the secretive committee, which we now have the transcripts for, the memo will be made public unless the president objects, which is unlikely. And in fact, everybody's expecting it to be released today.
Oh yeah, is today the end of the 5 days?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know if there was 5 days. I don't know if they're following any rules.
Well, that's a good question too. And I guess they can just. I mean, if he just says, "Well, I'm not going to sign anything," so you might as well just release it today, even though I have 2 more days to say no, I'm not gonna. I guess you can do it for less.
The main point here, which you made on the Tuesday show, I guess, and have made on other days besides the Tuesday show.
I don't remember anything.
Republicans on Capitol Hill are not rallying around Trump because they love his policies and leadership style. It's self-preservation, and basically nobody's going anywhere unless or until Republicans are replaced in the Congress. That's really his point. So forget about Mueller doing this. Republicans are going to be unmoved, whatever happens.
Yeah.
And in fact, what happened the other day is that there was more time given, I guess, for Flynn and maybe his other people as well to not be sentenced, or it was delayed in terms of what was going to happen to them, with the implication that they're still talking to Mueller, and as long as they're talking to Mueller, the prosecution of their crimes is going to be delayed. That means that the report will be delayed, the investigation will be delayed, and so nothing's going to happen until May or June. There will be no report this week or next month. So, it gets closer to the midterms when that report comes out, which is kind of like bad for the Republicans. Will it be delayed until after the midterms? Anything is possible. And that's another reason not to put all your eggs in the Mueller basket. Nonetheless, the idea that this will have zero or no impact or nothing's going to come out before the midterms is kind of a stretch. And his main point in the end is it's true that Republicans on the Hill, who, remember, are not people may look at this differently, need to be replaced if you really want to have anything done. That is a point that can't be made enough.
That is true. And Yeah, it's hard to get through even a short article without getting angry at the author. But you have to remind yourself 10 times during things. He's talking about how Republicans see this and what they'll excuse.
Still Republicans, not even
yeah.
regular Republicans.
That is true.
Still Republicans.
Now, they may also, by the way, they may be perfectly willing to excuse or not do anything about it. That's all it takes for them to so-called excuse it. Money laundering, too. That also may not bother them. We don't know. Then that's where we would get into perhaps if Armando wanted to come on today and discuss some of that, where we might get into that fight over whether or not all lawyers, constitutional lawyers, really do believe that a sitting president can't be indicted. Not sure that that's the case, but we're not there yet. So hang on to your hats.
Well,
and
there's always a difference
still have
between what people believe and what they say. They're
right.
not always the same thing.
Well, that is true, too. And also people could change their minds and lie about having supported it the whole time.
Right?
There's no rules, man.
And sometimes, lawyers are just trying to put their client's situation in the best possible light. And, that's...
Right. Sometimes they're drunken criminals themselves. So, okay.
Well,
I'm just saying, it does happen.
Just saying. Laura Rosen also, to bolster Jones' beat here,
maybe
says that Adam Schiff blames Paul Ryan. Ryan seems not to understand, there's a quote, Ryan, quote, seems not to understand the central bargain underpinning the creation of the intelligence committees after Watergate. In exchange for the intelligence community's willingness to reveal closely guarded national secrets to a select group of members and staff for the purposes of oversight, the committees and the congressional leadership pledged to handle the information responsibly and without regard to politics. So Schiff is basically saying that what Devin Nunes is trying to do by weaponizing intelligence details that he himself is not thoroughly familiar with but doesn't care is going to blow up the relationship between the intelligence community and Congress, making the intelligence community less likely to share sensitive information because bozos, not to insult clowns, but bozos like Devin Nunes are going to ruin it by using it for partisan gain regardless of the consequences, which is not a good thing for the country. And Schiff is making a point of this.
And a good point at that. And he's, I'm sure, entirely right in that. Well, by the way, both Devin Nunes and Paul Ryan, and you may have guessed, born during the latter part of the Nixon administration. So toddlers or in diapers during Watergate. No surprise that they have no idea, having grown up as Republicans, steeped in a culture which taught them that nothing wrong was done there anyway, and that Nixon was railroaded. So I guess this is the end.
But let's put this in perspective here, which David Chalian does, political director for CNN and a conservative-leaning commentator who has good sources. Gingrich to RNC on the Dems in the 2018 landscape, quote, "This is a fight. We're in a cultural civil war with people who despise us. There's no neutrality in that." I
agree. Can't
we
wait
do,
to
actually.
beat you.
It is true.
Yeah.
But people have really gone to their bunkers, and this is all-out war.
Yes. By the way, here's the difference. I agree that we're in a cultural war with people who hate us, and they also agree to the same thing. I think that's a bad thing. They think that's a good thing. Right. I would like to avoid it. This is what they've lived their entire lives for.
We're not necessarily advocating or ready for scorched earth tactics. They live by it. I mean, there's a lot of differences here. These are asymmetric things between asymmetric parties.
Yeah.
But it's important to realize that that's the way they think. And that's why I like it when people cover Republicans on the Hill Republicans, who, again, are not people.
Yes.
They're Hill Republicans. It doesn't mean they're less than people. They're different than your average person who's going to hear the same thing. That's what I mean by that.
Yes. Okay.
Not that they aren't human. They are.
Not trying to say they're subhuman. They're just parallels to humans.
They are not your ordinary, average, everyday person interested in politics who hears this stuff. They are people who are fighting for their jobs and see everything that happens with Trump as a threat to their power and act accordingly. And we just need to always understand that and keep that, in the forefront.
Okay. I'll start doing that.
Okay. Let's see what we have here. I'm going to skip this really interesting article on the Hastert rule because it's something maybe you want to look at later or not, but I don't think you're going to learn anything from it, but it might be something in there for your readers. The Monkey Cage has a nice piece by Henry Farrell today. Trump is a typical conservative. That says a lot about the conservative tradition, and talks about the idea that never-Trumpers, for example, always try to say he's not a real conservative. Trump is really harming the concept of conservatism. And Henry Farrell talks with Corey Robin, author of The Reactionary Mind, Conservatism from Edmund Burke to Donald Trump, second edition, and talks about the fact that actually none of that is true. Since Trump was elected, Trump actually represents everything about conservatism, and you can try to distance yourself from it, but that's not how it works.
That's true. I guess if it was really the case that he had nothing whatsoever to do with conservatism, then we would actually be getting some votes of substance out of Jeff Flake instead of just rhetoric.
Right. So I'll throw that in because I thought you might find that interesting to look at a little bit later. What I want to finish my segment with, though, is kind of an interesting point and counterpoint here between Tom Edsall, who isn't necessarily voicing his own views, but is collecting political scientists' views on what happens going forward with the DACA Dreamer immigration argument. And Dan Dresner, on the other side, in the Washington Post, about the mediocre conservative argument for a grand bargain on immigration. Essentially, what Tom Edsall is arguing, his title is Trump has got Democrats right where he wants them. They're caught between a rock and a hard place. They want to defend the Dreamers, but they are finding the proposals that go along with that to decrease legal immigration by 44%, by accepting the family, what they call chain migration, which is family unification, and some of the other things that go along with that, extremely unpalatable. And they find themselves in the position which Trump deliberately did by causing this crisis by, eliminating the DACA provision, which he was empowered to do because it was never a law. It was something Obama had originally done. So making March 5th a deadline. And that leaves Democrats with a choice. What do? Do you bargain with them? Do you make compromises in order to get the Dreamers protected? Do you not? And that's a very, very difficult position for Democrats to be in. And he talks to a number of political scientists, from Roy Teixeira to other Democratic-leaning political scientists, who says there's not a whole lot that Democrats can do about it. More bluntly, Nolan McCarty, a political scientist at Princeton, declared in an email responding to my inquiry, the Democrats don't have a lot of good options other than support it enough so it can pass with unified Republican support. Blocking it would allow the Trump administration to suggest the Democrats are willing to trade Dreamers for lottery and chain migration, as well as position them as soft on border security. An advantage in accepting the Trump proposal, McCarty says, is that border security appropriations and visa programs can be fixed if the Democrats regain control. The effects of Dreamer deportations, or sending them back into the shadows, is far less reversible. So Trump and Stephen Miller, senior advisor to the president, clearly made this calculation and decided they would win either way. Take, for example, the following tweet from the president's account on January 27th. Interestingly, Edsall doesn't assume Trump writes his own tweets. I have ordered a DACA, a wonderful deal, including a doubling in the number of recipients and 12-year pathway to citizenship for two reasons, because the Republicans want to fix a long-time terrible problem and to show the Democrats don't want to solve DACA, only use it. Robert Borisage, president of the Left Liberal Institute for America's Future, argued that Democrats should make every effort to get the immigration issue off center stage. In my view, Trump wins as long as we're arguing about it, so it would be good to get this done soon. What should Democrats do? I take the deal after pushing for concessions on family unification and lottery system and pushing against full commitment of $25 billion as an outrage. Bruce Kane, political scientist at Stanford, makes the case that political logic favors Democratic cooperation. If the Democrats compromise on a few of the non-DACA items and the congressional Republicans' position is no DACA, Republican position is untenable and looks as though they're caving to their extreme nativist faction. And that's, in fact, what's happening between the argument between Senate Republicans and House Republicans, because they don't agree on what to do. And if the Democrats make their position a clean bill on DACA and no compromise on the other items, it hands the Republicans a perfect wedge item going into 2018, possibly keeping them in control of both houses. And that's the problem that Schumer has on his plate.
Yeah.
So the other side is Dan Dresner saying the mediocre conservative argument for a grand bargain on immigration. Liberals have excellent reasons to reject any negotiation with Stephen Miller, not with Trump, it says Stephen Miller, on both policy and principle grounds. And basically, what he says is, as I understand it, the deal being offered by the Trump administration, after summarizing some of the numbers about what actual immigration is, so as I understand it, the deal being offered by the Trump administration is not a good one on policy grounds, on political grounds, and on public opinion grounds. That seems like good enough reasons for no negotiations. To be clear, I agree with Megan McArdle that Democrat expectations on immigration right now are unrealistic, but this is an argument for keeping the government open without talking about a grand bargain. And then, let's see, who is Linker? He's talking about somebody named Linker. Damon Linker, blasting the liberal rejection of this whole process. And Linker says many millions of Americans do have negative opinions about trends, and all the finger-wagging and name-calling in the world isn't going to change that. Those millions of Americans are our fellow citizens. They will continue to vote and therefore exercise political power. Can anyone seriously believe that attempting to declare their views beyond the political pale and denying them a seat at the policy-making table will accomplish anything beyond radicalizing them further? And then this is the italicized part. Potentially sending them outside of the existing party system to do battle with it from an even more extreme position, emphasis added. Well, if you send them outside of the Republican Party to a more extreme position, who the frick cares?
I guess. Well, I mean, other than the fact that we'll have to read their garbage in the paper and on Twitter.
I don't care if the Republican Party splits between the nativists and the traditionalists. Why is that a problem? That's actually a bonus.
Yeah. Maybe. I don't know.
Anyway, Dresner says, read that last sentence again. After spending an entire column complaining about liberal intransigence, Linker warns that a bargain needs to be struck because otherwise restrictionists will be so intransigent that they'll be acting in an extra-legal manner. That doggone, huh? Okay. A third of Americans want to see greater restrictions. That means two-thirds don't. And according to Pew, immigration is way down the list of issues that Americans believe should be a top priority for the federal government right now. I may be just a small-town political scientist, but in most democracies, that means that the restrictionists don't get to cut legal immigration by half or by a quarter or at all, really. And that's his position. So where do you stand on it?
I don't know yet. I don't know.
What should Democrats do?
Who can tell? This has been the discussion for days. Is all we can do is outline the various angles from which Democrats, whatever they decide to do, can be attacked and how when they do it. So if somebody's going to be disappointed, either that the Democrats are spineless or that they sold out one group or another or any
right. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. I mean, do what you can, given that you don't have power. You're in the minority party. You really can't do anything. Yeah. So vote the way you think you ought to. Do the right thing. That may mean a different thing for Donnelly and Manchin than the rest of the Democratic Party. Okay, fine. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the entire 2018 election is going to be revolving around those votes. It's not. There's a lot of other things going on, including what we spent the first segment talking about in terms of what happens.
What was that again?
With Mueller and the investigation and where Trump stands and all of that.
Yes, that thing.
So, do what you can do when you're in the minority and then stop being the minority and then, do something. I mean, It's just fairly straightforward. So, that to me also means lay off the Democrats are spineless nonsense, because that doesn't accomplish anything whatsoever.
Yes, that is
doesn't
true.
Change their mind, doesn't change how they vote. It doesn't get you more votes. It does nothing. I'm not into doing things that get you nothing. I'm kind of a practical person there.
Yeah. Well, I'm into empty calories. Does that count?
Do you want to primary Manchin in West Virginia? I mean, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
outside. What are you going to do about it?
On the other hand, I also can't really be all about no primaries. Don't do that sort of thing. We have to encourage that occasionally.
They can choose your spots.
Yes.
West Virginia may not be the place.
That may not be true. Yes. Well, on the other hand, I also hate primaries. So I hate the feeling of going through them, but I understand when they're necessary. And sometimes I miss the mark and don't understand when they're necessary, or understand them to be necessary when they're not. I occasionally make mistakes with that.
This also gets back, I guess, to our Ross Douthat column from a couple of days ago about how don't exclude Miller from the room, always include him because he represents a faction. In my perspective, I think was closer to Dresner's, which is that I don't think we need Nazis at the table just because they represent a faction.
Yeah, that's true. What a terrible faction.
Yeah, pretty much. So why don't you exclude them and work around them? That happens all the time in politics, and it happens in American politics.
Yes, that is probably true. And, of course, it will be about 10 seconds before Ross Douthat argues for excluding, let's say, transgender community from some negotiation or another,
or the Irish. I mean,
yes.
do you have a alarm for that? Like, 10 seconds are up. Here's Ross Douthat.
No, not that one.
The fact of the matter is that I think that it is a incredibly difficult position. Shutting down the government isn't going to get us what we want, so therefore that's not the tack to take. What you ought to do is get whatever you possibly can from negotiations on those other items, and if you find them unacceptable, then don't take the deal.
Mm. Yes.
If you find them acceptable because you whittled it down to stuff that you can live with, take the deal. Dreamers are done. They can't go back on that, and then undo the rest.
That may be what you have to do. You have to approach it piecemeal, which is, of course, what they did in the last one, and we hate them because of it or something. I can't remember
what we hate is we hate their intent. And that's because Stephen Miller's at the table.
Oh,
and that's part of the reason why it's very difficult to negotiate with them. Because no matter what they say, we know what their intent is.
That is true. That's been pretty clear.
Yeah, it's been crystal clear.
Okay.
Anyway, so that's my summary. I just thought we would take us back to a nicer, calmer time, which is now, but overseas. This is a great piece in the Washington Post. I just laughed when I saw it. Let me give you the headline. British Lord. That's not a name. That's actually a title.
Okay.
It's not like Jeffrey.
Reality winner.
Yeah. British Lord who resigned for being late has unresigned.
Resigned for being late?
For anybody who's ever arrived late to work, an apology will usually suffice. But for one British Lord, it was just too late to say sorry. It took less than 60 seconds for Michael Bates to arrive late, apologize profusely, offer his resignation, this is in the House of Lords, and then leave. I want to offer my sincere apologies to Baroness Lister for my discourtesy in not being in my place to answer her question on a very important matter at the beginning of questions, the International Development Minister said, standing up in front of his peers. And when he says peers, he means peers.
You're not kidding. Okay.
Right? During the 5 years in which it's been my privilege to answer questions from this dispatch box in behalf of the government, I've always believed that we should rise to the highest possible standards of courtesy and respect in responding on behalf of the government to the legitimate questions of the legislature, he continued. Although he was just a couple of minutes late, Bates went on to say, I'm thoroughly ashamed at not being in my place, and therefore I shall be offering my resignation to the Prime Minister with immediate effect. I do apologize. And he gathered his belongings and he exited.
Took his pictures off the desk and everything. Oh, my God, that guy wants to go home.
This is the kind of scandal we need to have. Instead of the scandals we have here, why can't we have a scandal like that? Yeah. I mean, I miss the tan suit and Obama's feet on the desk,
I resign.
Why can't we have scandals like, what do we have to have these scandals? The scandals we're having today are just awful. They're about Nazis in the White House and ripping up the intelligence community's, agreements with Congress that have been in place for decades and protecting a crook in the White House. Why can't we have scandals like they have in England?
I got to tell you, the Nazis allegedly made the trains run not late, but on time. This man is worse than Hitler.
Yeah, well, I hope we don't miss our break at the top of the hour, because if I talk over it, I'm afraid I'll have to resign.
Yeah, that's true. I might resign during the break, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, could happen.
Well, we're not quite there yet, so we can wrap up for the day and for the week and lament our fate before you go.
Yeah, well, as you know, it was a little bit of an extended piece today, but there was just so much to talk about, I couldn't help it.
You should resign.
I should. As of now, maybe I will.
Right.
One last thing. We have like a couple of minutes before the break.
We have, a minute and a half. That's enough time for you to unresign if you like to.
Well, I can unresign and then resign again. That gives me time to do it 3 times. So this is a piece in the Hill. Not that the Hill is a great source for this, but it's the first one I found. It was there. And it's a reminder that during the State of the Union, Trump said something which should be rather upsetting, but so much else is going on that we all lost track of it.
Oh.
And that is that Congress should give agencies power to fire federal employees.
Oh, yeah, right.
All Americans deserve accountability and respect, and that's what we are giving them, said Trump. So tonight, I call on the Congress to empower every cabinet secretary with the authority to reward good workers and to remove federal employees who undermine the public trust or fail the American people. In the context of what's going on with the FBI right now, that's actually a chilling comment and maybe one of the worst things he said during the entire speech. I just don't want to forget that.
Yeah, it's another attempt to harken back to Andrew Jackson and the spoils system, I guess, if you remember your U.S. history, or perhaps it was only AP U.S. history that we bothered to discuss that, but it's a long-standing tradition. Another norm he'd be smashing. We're talking about 150 years plus, I think, since we've really just operated purely on that spoils system. Of course, the civil service reforms that he's really talking about are considerably younger than that, but it's always been the case in the living memory of almost every still living and still voting American that civil servants are protected from the whims and angers of the president, and for good reason. But, of course, he'll want nothing to do with those good reasons. And not surprising, but a good point to bring that back up.
Anyway, thought I'd do that right before the break. Thanks.
Yeah.
And this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning, who has another hour of the show to go. And then tomorrow,
believe it or not,
I'll be back Monday.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Greg. By the way, news now coming in. Trump actually, yes, expressing anger with the memo from Wray after all. So we'll catch up with that after the break. And a number of other offshoots of all of these stories. This is a very complex day. They're really doing a good job flooding the zone and keeping us scrambling today. We'll be back after a short break to try and unscramble it. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Just our short break. Sometimes I think we should, I guess it would be an unfortunate thing to go to 2 minutes at the top of the hour as well as every place else, since most people probably hate breaks of any length. But, sometimes I go about thinking maybe we ought to check in on one story or another during this break and see whether it's worth spending some time on. And I get into it, and then I realize, oh, gosh, we have to come back. All right, well, it's just as well, as there is so much we need to catch up on. I think I, too, will have to skip the Vox explainer on the Hastert rule just because we have too much to get through elsewhere. Also, I guess I did have a question. I was kind of curious, like, why Vox would feel like now's the time to explain that thing. And I'm frequently baffled by Vox and their explainer approach to everything, but I don't know. Anyway, we'll set that one aside because there's just too much else out there. I'll tell you what just distracted me for a second was Brian Beutler a couple of minutes ago tweeting, "This is dumb even by the vegetative standard of Federalist magazine. Extraordinarily horrible publication and a very dumb staff, to be honest with you." And I skipped it at first because I said, okay, there's just too much going on with everything else to worry about the idiots at the Federalist. And then I'm seeing other people retweeting it with comments like, oh my God, and Kevin Cruz said they need to test their office for lead paint. So what the hell is going on? I'm just curious. I'm going to check in on this. He's got a screen grab here. I guess it has to do with the memo, so it's not off topic. For background, it says, Schiff has spent the last week and a half upset that the majority's memo alleging abuses was available for House review. He and his fellow Democrats had voted against making such a memo available to the House, much less the public. He said it was reckless to discuss anything in the memo and that it compromised national security. A compliant media, I was wondering about that. Compliant media lapped it up. He announced, though, that he had created a counter memo in support of the Trump-Russia collusion theory we keep hearing about. Today, as the committee gathered to vote on releasing their memo to the public following its lengthy House review, Schiff, all right, so I don't even know what what is that dumb? I'm not even certain what their complaint is. So, okay, that was a waste of time. And perhaps I just read it all excited that something very obvious was going to happen. And I don't get it. Let's see. Yes, Greg reminding us, this is that you will be blocked by the Federalist if you dare to ask who funds the Federalist. That's true, and probably part and parcel of all this. The Federalist and Sean, what's his name? Davis? I can't remember. They were the source, by the way, of the, I guess the chief source of Republican grousing and pushback and then laughter that I didn't know what I was talking about when I was saying that if you had not yet taken the oath of office as a senator or a member of the House, that you were not officially considered a member of the Senate or House, and whether or not you could, Davis, that's right, Sean Davis. Thanks, Greg. But remember when I was positing at the beginning of the year, that last year, that is, if they really, really wanted to play super hardball, and admittedly the case for playing that kind of super hardball for most people had not yet been laid out quite as clearly. I don't know whether that we would even think the majority of folks would consider the case to have been laid out yet, because it would be a very, the hardball would have been rather extreme to have used, that is, the vacancies in the then existing Senate at the beginning of the year, plus the continuing presidency of the Senate at that time of Joe Biden, to engineer a vote on installing Merrick Garland on the Supreme Court rather than Neil Gorsuch. And I'm sure that would have been looked askance at then, and might even be looked askance at now as beyond the pale, even though there's no pale anymore. And all norms have been shattered by the Trump administration and his allies. But it would be, of course, and that's something they'll be willing to look past and judge whether or not he's being presidential based on whether or not he can read a teleprompter. But should anything approaching that be attempted by Democrats, it would, of course, be the second coming of the Holocaust, or something quite like it. Noting this morning what the differing standards are, for instance, about Trump and his continued lying. I observed in response to Atrios saying this morning, guys, I think Donald Trump lies about everything. My reply, hearkening back further than the Hillary Clinton campaign, with a heavy sigh, noting that Donald Trump invented the internet or whatever. This has been the game, for whatever reason, for the past, 4 or 5 presidential elections now already, that Democrats are a very comfortable target for, if not saying they're outright liars, doing everything but stating it outright in implying that they were liars or not to be trustworthy, or they have a credibility problem or a serial exaggeration problem. And yet the biggest liars in the world are the ones running for office as Republicans, and you just can't say that about these people. They're respected politicians and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I guess we're not about to reverse that anytime soon. All right. Let's see. What else are you sending me here, Greg? Jennifer Rubin. What? Why are we listening to her again? Oh, yeah. That's right. She's writing things that sound very close to reasonable. What's this? An opinion piece, I guess this is hers. The Nunes fiasco grows more preposterous by the yard, by the pound, by the hour. I figured it might be the minute, but by the hour. And he has kindly excerpted the key phrase here, I believe. If Democrats ever needed proof for the midterms that the GOP is a threat to national security and is unfit to govern, this should do it. The Republicans cannot with a straight face claim to be the party of national security while carrying on in such fashion. The Nunes so-called memo fashion, I guess, here. And even if a congressman in Iowa or Michigan were to say he played no part in Nunes's conduct, his or her reelection, by definition, would help return Nunes to the Intelligence Committee chairmanship and Ryan to the speakership, if he in fact runs again. In short, Democrats can argue that if you vote for anyone with an R after his or her name, you are voting to hobble the FBI, expose our secrets to our enemies, and help Trump escape the consequences of possible wrongdoing. Talk about a winning message. We'll see. Of course, if you were to run on that message and somehow lose anyway, whether because Russia interferes or anything else, then there would, of course, be, you'd find yourself faced with a cadre of probably Democrats, or at least left-leaning voters insisting, see, you blew it, you blew the easiest election ever by focusing on, well, there is a considerable contingent of left-leaning folks who say, who agree with Donald Trump, the fake news of Russia collusion. So, I don't know. And then they would say, why are you taking your Democratic strategy memos from Jennifer Rubin? And you would have to pause and say, why am I doing? Why did I do that? Oh, she agreed with me. Yeah, well, so just a note from the other side of the left side of the aisle to remind you that, okay, you should probably want to reach this conclusion independently, which you have, but I don't know. What do we say? Grain of salt, I suppose, that we always take Jennifer Rubin's writing with. But she makes a good point that certainly any Republican is complicit in this, because they will, of course, cast their votes, the first votes of the next Congress, to keep these people in power. Although I suppose it's possible that they might have tired, even in that Republican conference, of Nunes at the helm of the Intelligence Committee. It may just be too much for them. But they're into rewarding people who give them those headaches. After all, we've sort of danced around this bit of news, the announcement that Trey Gowdy won't be seeking re-election. But what he's going to do next, we don't know. Greg hinted that he was available now, I guess, in case Nunes, for whatever reason, was no longer capable of heading the Intelligence Committee. But word is, or speculation, I guess, is that he may have his eye on a judgeship, whether at the district court level or the circuit court level. We can't be sure, but it was astutely pointed out, I think, by David Neer, that a brand new opening on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, appearing yesterday as one of the active judges there, moved to senior judge status, thereby opening up a full-time position as associate judge on the, I guess they don't refer to them as associates, just judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals panel. Brand new, and that may explain the suddenness with which Trey Gowdy decided to make his move. We don't really know for sure. Could be anything. Man, there's so much more. Let's see. What other tabs have I opened? These are the things that are happening as we speak. Matthew Miller, who I think, now that I think about it, was the might have been the source of my the first report that I saw, in which it was alleged that there was, in fact, no investigation opened by Devin Nunes or the committee whatsoever with respect to the FBI or DOJ generally, though that was the terminology he used, that they were under investigation by this committee. That all came up in the context, I guess, of asking whether or not, Democrats asking whether or not they couldn't put some testimony on the record from the Department of Justice or FBI with respect to the question of whether or not to release the so-called Nunes memo. And his response apparently was, no, we're not going to take testimony from those entities that are currently under investigation by this committee. And then people just wrote down, reporters, sometimes it's tough to tell, when the chairman of the Intelligence Committee normally tells you that there's an investigation of something, normally you believe it because it wouldn't be, it's not within the realm of plausibility that the chairman of the committee would simply lie about an easily verifiable or disprovable, in this case, fact. But that's something that they have gotten into the habit of doing. And so it went to print that there was an investigation, and there really isn't. And that's kind of weird. I'll have to look back in Matthew Miller's timeline to see. I vaguely recall that it might have been him that tweeted this. But in fact, he's got this other tidbit here, retweeting Manu Raju, of course, senior congressional correspondent for CNN at the moment. Anyway, Trump can't fire him from that. It's just the people move around a lot. It's been a while since he's been at CNN, but I remember him at, I think at Roll Call? Yeah, well, anyway. The Hill. Okay, the other trade mag on politics. All right, well, at any rate, he says that Trump told associates last night the Nunes memo will discredit Mueller and his probe and show bias in the FBI. White House aides supporting his stance, of course, that's all they do. And Trump, meantime, is, it says here, angry about the FBI statement yesterday. This per Kevin Liptak, also at CNN, and Sarah Murray and Caitlin Collins, with a link to a CNN piece here. Let's see, is that fully? Yeah, okay, if I click through, I can get that link. Let's, I guess, take a look at this. I mean, a lot of these points will likely have been covered, but I wanted to put on record that he says he's mad about the Wray statement, and that was a point of discussion before. Now I've got to mute you. Sorry. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at the written version of this rather than have it read to us. Well, I'll read to you. I mean, read to us on video, which you wouldn't be able to see. I'd be able to take a break if I just let the video roll. President Donald Trump, believe it or not, continues to tell his associates he believed the highly controversial Republican memo alleging the FBI abused its surveillance tools could help discredit the Russia investigation. Multiple sources familiar with White House discussion said this is important, of course, because I don't think that he has said explicitly why he's in favor of releasing the memo, but everybody figures, it's pretty easy to figure out that he was interested in doing it in order to discredit the Mueller probe. But now he's actually, there are sources saying I heard him say as much. We haven't had to wait for that. Usually he just tells Lester Holt why he's doing things, but there hasn't been a interview with him lately anyway. All right. So let's see. He continues to tell associates that he believed this memo would undermine the investigation. The president continues to direct some of his anger toward his Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein. In phone calls last night and over the past days, Trump has told friends he believes the memo would expose bias within the agency's top ranks and make it easier for him to argue the Russia investigations are prejudiced against him, according to two sources. So, in other words, our first sourced information on the president's obstruction of justice in the investigation against him for obstruction of justice in the investigation against him for collusion with Russia during the campaign. And also money laundering, I guess, even outside of the campaign, which he would be on the hook for even had he lost and or never run for president in the first place. Except that no one was looking at him because he was just a clown. It didn't matter. Okay, moving back to the article. Trump was upset Wednesday in the wake of the FBI's statement challenging the release of a controversial memo crafted by Republicans in the House Intelligence Committee, led by Nunes. The statement was issued just hours after the president made clear he wanted the document public, so I missed it. It was already out there. White House aides and advisors expect a decision from Trump on whether to release the controversial memo on Thursday. An official tells CNN, but the president has already made clear he's inclined to approve the document's release. The FBI, led by a director that Trump handpicked after he fired Comey, released a harshly worded statement Wednesday afternoon condemning the release of a 4-page memo, etc., etc. I feel like Willy Wonka at this point. People familiar with the president's thinking say the fate of Rosenstein remains in question amid the expected release of the Nunes memo. One person suggested if Rosenstein merely submitted an application to renew a FISA warrant, one granted under previous leadership and based in part on information from the infamous Steele dossier, that probably wouldn't be damning enough revelation for Trump to move to fire him. But another person said Trump's so frustrated with the Russia investigation, and in turn Rosenstein, that he may look for any opportunity to build a case for Rosenstein's firing. I don't expect Trump himself to be able to distinguish any nuance there. Anything, I think, that reflects in his mind poorly on Rosenstein will be reason to fire him. The idea that he was simply renewing an existing FISA warrant, that won't make any difference to him. He's either going to do it or not do it based on whether or not he thinks Rosenstein has any fault. In other words, I guess really actually it'll be based on whether or not he thinks that accusation is good enough cover for him to go ahead and do that. If it's still possible that someone like, I don't know, Don McGahn, because allegedly he talked him out of something else stupid in this, might be able to talk him out of firing Rod Rosenstein, but who knows anymore. Now that it's out that McGahn talked him out of firing, who are we firing this time? Mueller himself. The president may resent the notion that there are people who now think McGahn controls me, and that may backfire on him, and he might go ahead and fire Rosenstein. Or he may go ahead and fire Wray along with it. Who knows? Let's see. Where were we with this? The discussions are ongoing within the White House, one of the sources said. Another source familiar with the White House discussions said they would be stunned if anything happens to Rosenstein, even though he's not a Trump favorite. Well, could we count on your vote, Mr. Stunned? As CNN has previously reported, the president has vented recently about wanting to fire Rosenstein, but for now it remains unclear. No one really knows, and we'll just have to wait and see how it plays out. But okay, at least we know now that he has expressed his anger about it. Now, oh man, I just had this thing, and I've put it aside, and I closed the tweet I wanted with that, and now I have to go back and make sure I can recover it so that I can provide it to all of you. Luckily, Macintosh makes it relatively easy to do. There it is, the Mark Murray tweet, so that I have it for... no, not Mark Murray. Why do I have that? That's a completely different guy. All right. Dang it. I knew this was going to happen. We'll try this one more time here to get the recently closed tabs. There we go. Manu Raju, we had that one. Rod Rosenstein. Where is this thing? Is it, it only keeps like 5 of them. So, all right, that bothers me. Well, we'll reopen this thing and trace it back from there. Manu Raju also had, there we go, Matthew Miller. Okay, we got the right tab up there. Manu Raju, I also had 2 other tweets of his open when I was trying to recover the first indication that there was no investigation launched by Nunes here. I opened up his tweets from late yesterday. Let's see. Which one was first? This one was 5:50 p.m. 4:30 p.m. Okay, so 4:30 yesterday. Nunes catches Dems by surprise by saying DOJ and FBI are under, quote, investigation. He at least enclosed his report on it in scare quotes. By House Intel and should not be briefing them on the memo. And I would urge, quote, and I would urge my colleagues to vote no. We are not going to be briefed by people that are under investigation by this committee, unquote. And then later, an hour later, noting, Nunes, asked by Dems about his decision to investigate DOJ/FBI without their knowledge, makes clear that he thinks, quote, this is how he hedges on this. In other words, they said, wait a minute, how is it that the FBI and Department of Justice are under investigation by this committee and we know nothing about it? Either you're fudging when you use the word investigation, you're just lying, or you're acting so far outside of your authority that we can't trust anything you do. And, maybe you need to be arrested somehow in all of this. Just launching investigations of the Department of Justice and FBI on your own? What's that about? And here's his explanation. Essentially, it comes down to, well, I was just sort of speaking hyperbolically. They're not under investigation. He says this, quote, every member of the House can conduct. You have always had my strong support to investigate, review anything under our jurisdiction. He still, of course, signs off on subpoenas on behalf of the House, but and the House Intelligence Committee. But this is where he's at. No, you're not allowed to have the testimony you want. In other words, Democrats asking for, well, can we please have the FBI and the Department of Justice speak on whether or not we ought to be releasing this memo or doing any of the other things that you appear to want the committee to do on behalf of the Trump administration? His answer is no, we can't have their testimony because they're under investigation. Wait a minute. What do you mean under investigation? Well, what I mean is not investigation, but you're a member of the House Intelligence Committee. If you see something, investigate something. See something, say something. See something, investigate something. Every member of the House can conduct an investigation. What's for lunch? There you go. That's an investigation. I wanted to know what they had for lunch in the cafeteria. I investigated it. It didn't need to be investigated. I could have just looked at the menu, but that in itself would be technically an investigation. So he's trying to weasel out of having been caught out on that one. And I think it's probably well worth noting. Let's see. Man, gosh, there's just so many other things. How can I get to all of this? I do not know. Let me look in Pocket. I put away a number of important things there that we definitely need to take note of. On another tangent, I guess, we'll have to note this one. New York Times, and I saw The Hill taking note of this. We'll just give you, I think, the headline on this rather than delve into the story. But here's the Times headline. United States will hit debt limit sooner than expected because of tax cuts. Maybe we'll give you the lead. Alan Rappaport put this one together for the Times yesterday. The Congressional Budget Office said on Wednesday that the United States, that is the whole country, the officialdom, the government of the United States, is expected to bump up against its borrowing limit a month earlier than previously expected. A function of last year's, you won't believe it, $1.5 trillion tax cut, which is resulting in less revenue for the Treasury Department. You all remember, of course, the famous basis on which these things, tax cuts like this, are offered to the rich. Who needs tax cuts less than the rich? Nobody. But why do we offer them to the rich? Because trickle down and we'll all get a piece of it and create jobs and yada yada. And of course, you remember the Laffer curve, right? The won't Treasury revenues quite counterintuitively will increase because people will, I don't know what, and there's a couple theories on this. They'll invest more money and therefore make more money and therefore be liable for more taxation, dollar for dollar, and so revenues will increase. Also, of course, with lower rates, people will be, rich people will be less reluctant to report income that they might otherwise try to hide in order to try to engineer lower taxes for themselves. They're making that much more money. They can afford to part with raw dollars in greater numbers than they used to. Anyway, it doesn't matter how many theories there are. None of them work, and we're finding that out again right now. We've been through this like 3-4 times already, but for some reason, i.e. the people making the decisions are rich people and will have more money if they just decide that they believe this BS for the 5th time. Here it is again. If you cut taxes on the rich, you will get less money in the Treasury. So that's what the CBO says. But I'm sure within a couple of days, the Treasury Secretary will just say that's fake news, and they'll be calling for the abolition of the CBO all over again. So when do we hit the debt limit? Does this say? According to the Budget Office, the borrowing limit will most likely need to be raised in early March, after the extraordinary measures to extend borrowing employed by the Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, rich guy, are exhausted. We're all exhausted, aren't we? The Budget Office previously projected that the debt limit would not need to be raised beyond its current level of $20.5 trillion until late March or early April. But now it will be early March, which means we're about 1 month away. We're about a week away from another shutdown possibility and about 4 weeks away from a debt ceiling explosion, and the need for Donald Trump to mint the coin. And of course, he'll mint two, one for the Treasury and one for him. And we'll all just say, that's not normal. And well, that'll be that. All right, bumping up again, once again, against one of our breaks. A plea coming in, though, from Armando, who admits in open court that he has not listened this morning. But he can do 20 minutes on Mueller and the issues discussed yesterday if we want. We may want to return to that. We'll certainly leave the possibility open. So open, in fact, that I will have forgotten to start my music. And so we'll have to cut out at the proper time, despite the fact that we won't have reached the usual and expected time in our music. That will create editing nightmares for all. But don't worry about it. We'll be back. I'll check in with Armando, see if he wants to drop by and take a quick scan and see that we don't miss anything else. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll have a little extra music to tail off behind us. Let's try and do a speed round, if I can, to try and get you the headlines that you need to be able to follow and see if Armando is ready, willing, and able to come on and bring us back to the Mueller side of the ledger. All of this, of course, bears on it, but I'll try and get some of the other bits and pieces that you're going to need to keep an eye on. First of all, we'll just do headline on this one. We have no time for anybody else's corruption today, but just adding to the list, every single member of the Trump administration and the Trump cabinet wants to get in on the corruption game. It's Ben Carson's turn. The Washington Post reporting under this headline, using his position for private gain. Ben Carson was warned he might run afoul of ethics rules by enlisting his son. I don't know what he did. We don't have time to get to what he did. Just on the record that Ben Carson is joining the corruption game, as we all figured he might eventually do. And this stuff is all over the place. We'll have to reserve that for another day. There's too much corruption elsewhere. Other things I want to enter onto the record. Let's see. One, all fans of the show will be disappointed if we don't make mention of the fact that Hope Hicks is in trouble. Hope Hicks, how does she do it? And by the way, am I the only one doing this? I feel like there's amnesia of some kind among the rest of the media here. Am I crazy? Do I remember it wrongly that for the first couple months of the primaries, anyway, I think it happened in the primaries. Maybe that's why it seems like ancient history. That every time a member of the press would make some sort of inquiry of the Trump campaign, Hope Hicks would, and see if you can grasp the amazingness of all this, she would answer their emails. That is astounding. That was what they were raving about. She answers every time. Now, she would answer, we have no comment at this time, we're working on it, or that's fake news, or whatever. They weren't into the fake news thing just yet. But she would give courtesy replies, essentially out of the office auto replies, basically, but handwritten or whatever. She would sit at her computer, because what else is she going to do? She's 20-something years old, and answer people's inquiries. What about this extraordinarily important issue that seems to, be eluding the Trump campaign? Thanks for your inquiry. We'll get back to you. And that was it for the most part. And everybody was like, wow, this is like personal service. I don't know. She's 20-something years old. How is it that she stays on top of this? And this is like the most hated campaign of any already. But she's acting with, dignity and courtesy and getting back to us because she was answering emails. And it was like, how does she do it? How does she stay on top of it all? And she was just, like I said, giving out-of-office auto replies. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. No comment, no comment, no comment. But this is apparently astounding to reporters, which I guess hints at the incredible rudeness that they encounter everywhere else, that they were just thrilled to death that this Hope Hicks character was such a charmer.
Lewandowski was assaulting them, so I guess an out-of-office reply is much better.
I guess that's true. Meanwhile, Lewandowski was assaulting Hicks, but okay. That was happening too.
Hey. You're going to get the Michael Wolff treatment and get thrown off your own show.
Yeah, except you can't do that. Ha ha. And also, I'm not even getting a fraction of the money. So what's the difference? You know what? Throw me off.
That's true.
I'm done. All right. Well, anyway, she's in trouble.
You know what I'm alluding to? I don't know if it's true, but apparently Mika threw Michael Wolff off the show because he talked about Nikki Haley. I just saw it in an email. A tweet. So
that's the liar you got to throw off the show?
I saw it on a Twitter that she threw him off the show.
Yeah, all right, fine, terrific. I mean, finally, there's a liar. They're going to throw off the Morning Joe show, and it's the guy who basically nailed it on Trump. But okay, the story on Hope Hicks, as I understand it, very briefly again, because we're trying to get to everything else, was that she was right there in the mix on Air Force One when Trump himself engineered a response on behalf of Don Jr. to the Trump Tower meeting, the infamous Trump Tower meeting. And I don't know whether she ever said she wasn't involved or whatever, but I guess Mueller has got her in his sights now. And so there we go. Everybody gets to say, Hope Hicks, how does she do it? And the answer is, 1, out-of-office auto replies, and 2, I obstruct justice whenever necessary and lie about what my boss did so that I don't get in trouble. That's how she does it. There's nothing.
What's remarkable about that story, at least from my perspective, is they are Trump and his acolytes are so sure that everyone is willing to completely do anything in the service of Trump that they couldn't imagine there might be a person, and maybe they were right, maybe they weren't completely wrong, but they found one guy who was a lawyer, who has his own history of being a person who, for better or worse, has, been apparently acted within the ethical lines and legal lines most of his life. Mark Corallo, let's not make Mark Corallo a saint. He is a crazy, extreme legal Republican, one of these Federalist Society types.
Okay.
But, the story that the New York Times reported was that Corallo and Hicks and Trump were on a conference call, and they were talking about the emails that Don Jr. had exchanged with Aguilar, I believe is his name.
Yeah.
Goldstone, those people.
Aguilar,
I'm going to bring you all the dirt. The Russians are going to give us all this stuff. And, Don Jr. said, that's great.
Yeah, I love it.
I love it. That was the phrase. I love it. And they were discussing, well, what are we going to say about all this? Well, and Hope Hicks said, don't worry, none of that will ever come out.
Yeah, and then it did, 24 hours later, from Don Jr. It must have.
It came out because they had it already.
That's true. That's true, too.
Let's be clear. What did Corallo interpret that to mean?
Yeah.
That we were going to either, spoliate evidence, which in civil cases leads to sanctions. In criminal cases, leads to charges of obstruction of justice.
Obstruction of justice. Never heard of
this. This is run-of-the-mill obstruction of justice, destroying evidence.
Yeah.
By then, I am positive Mueller had issued, and there was probably an alert in the White House that preserve all records for the investigation.
Yes. This would be another instance of the recurring story of Trump officials and Trump circle allies finding themselves astounded either in interviews or shortly after interviews with Mueller what his team already has. They go in with the plan to deny because how are they going to get a hold of our records if we don't give them to them, or if we destroy them rather than turn them over? And they're able to be confronted with them right then and there. I have your emails. How did you get them? And then, of course, the assumption is you could only have gotten them through surveillance abuses. And so, therefore, let's write a memo and pretend those surveillance abuses are real, as opposed to you're communicating on open channels, you're talking to foreign intelligence targets.
I sent a document request, and it was responded to.
Yeah, or for that matter, yeah. I mean,
and your lawyers went through the email records of your organization, as he was properly supposed to do.
Yeah.
And he turned over all responsive documents.
Right. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, I forgot to get to this story that Paul Manafort's lawyers sent their strategy memo accidentally. Although, you know, those lawyers, they love to send them with fax cover sheets that say, by the way, if I accidentally disclosed anything, you have to give it back to me.
They filed it with the court.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the one who doesn't have to give it back. So, all right.
I took a quick look at that, and it's, you know, it does have some damning information on there, though. I'm sure the lawyers will have some explanation or something. And if I was Hope Hicks's lawyer, I said this last night, it seems to me that it's silly to deny that she said no one will ever see it. What she should have argued was, look, I just didn't think anyone was going to see it. I don't know anything about criminal processes. I'm just a stupid 27-year-old girl who has been named White House Communications Director for some reason. You can't expect me to understand that Mueller could actually subpoena these documents and get them from us. I didn't know that he could do that.
Yeah. They just think everything's hidden.
Sure. Better to look stupid than guilty.
True. That would be better, I think, in the end. Although, you know, again, she and all the rest of them have come up in the Trump organization where that kind of tactics was successful because, honestly, prosecutors just too damn busy to worry about what some stupid real estate developer that they might get on a minor charge is doing. Now, if you're putting together, you know, billions of dollars worth of international money laundering charges, that might be more fun, and they might nail you. But typically, as an idiot real estate developer worth next to nothing, despite his claims, it was all right. He's lying. I gotta catch a drug dealer.
Let's not forget, Donald Trump made large contributions to elected law enforcement officials. Most notably, the one everyone knows about is Pam Biondi in Florida for Trump University, where he paid $25,000 to make the charges go away.
Right, $10,000 less than he paid in Texas.
Exactly. It's amazing how cheap it is to buy off a prosecutor.
And they need to get equal pay for equal work, I say.
Yeah. Again, one of the worst things that ever happened to Donald Trump was that he was elected president. And can I circle back to the discussion yesterday? Because I think it's important to understand what all this means in terms of Robert Mueller, who, you know, is our last hope in a sense for the rule of law if he survives. Which probably won't.
You can. I have to just enter on the record because both sides. Don't forget Cy Vance.
Cy Vance is, he's frankly should resign. By the way, you saw who got cleared. Your old boss.
Oh yes, that's right. Another thing we have to cram in there. Thanks to Bob McDonnell on that one.
Yeah, Bob McDonnell got him off.
He legalized bribery, although I expected, quite frankly, that he would always. I think even if Menendez went first and didn't end up in the Supreme Court, he probably would have been cleared on this one. But okay.
I totally agree. I think his long-term relationship with Melgen is such that the story Menendez told seemed very plausible. He would have done it for a friend. By that point, a donor has become a friend. So you can't really connect the campaign donations to a specific quid pro quo, and that's always been a pretty required argument. It was an aggressive prosecution that probably should never have been brought anyway. They just didn't have Menendez.
So Republicans will rend their garments today, but this also is the same precedent that will likely reduce the number of charges that finally stick against Donald Trump and his children as well.
Yes and no, because I think that this is where the Mueller power becomes interesting. I think you and I have been on what Donald Trump's real crimes were before he started running for president. and that he was running a money laundering operation for Russian oligarchs.
Yes, and he was financing the campaign with that cash, which is also a huge problem. And we haven't talked much about that one yet, but okay.
I do think that's, it may not be easy to get Donald Trump's direct fingerprints on the Russian interference in the election, but I do think
small.
He's going to be. Yeah, but I do think that they're going to be very easy to get his direct fingerprints on the money laundering operation. I really do.
There's money involved. But he wants it.
Right. And back then, he didn't fear it because he was just, as you said, just some guy. It's, some prosecutor might want to go after him, but none had, and he had gotten away with it for about 10 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what about Mueller? What can Mueller do? Mueller is actually a fairly independent person here, both in what he decides to charge, what he decides to argue, what he decides to appeal. The issue that you and Greg were discussing yesterday was about can he indict the president? And I think the difficulty there is that it's an open legal question. And do you want to be – you've got so much other stuff to look at. Do you take that on? Maybe you do. Maybe you do. And I actually think what would make it more interesting is if you charge him for things that are just outside the realm of the election and his actions as president for an indictment, and you send the rest in a report to Congress saying that you believe these are high crimes and misdemeanors, much like Starr did in 1998. It was 1998, I believe. So I think that the thing that Mueller can do that would be pretty smart about if he wants to test that constitutional question. And by the way, I don't know what your view is on it. I don't think there's any problem with indicting. I think the problem is prosecuting. I think you could file an indictment, leave it there, and say, okay, but it's waiting for you. When you finish, when you're done as president, you're going to have to come see us.
Yeah, that would be an interesting play, and why not? It'd be interesting to experiment with it because they'd immediately say, but we're too busy to respond to it. Well, don't respond. Just hang out.
Don't respond to it. You don't have to. You, Mr. President, don't have to respond to. You're no longer president.
When you're
It'll be sitting here waiting for you.
Yeah.
I guess it could be a sealed indictment, too, if you don't want to. And now we run into –
I'm for transparency.
Yeah. But we are going to be interested to run into the issue of an impact on elections. Like, when does Mueller finish? If it's by June, and arguably it's not going to impact the November election, but what if it's in September, October?
Yeah.
I think that the guidelines that had no impact on James Comey will probably impact Mueller, that he wouldn't make any announcements prior to the midterm election.
Yeah, maybe.
Which means, right after. How about the day after the elections? That'll be fun. But again, he has a great deal of discretion, almost independence in what he chooses to investigate, how he chooses to investigate. He has the freedom to take appeals on any legal question that goes his way. Let's say, for example, as we've heard about this Trump lawyer, the Espy rule. I don't know if you read about that. That the Trump lawyers are, and it's a reference to Mike Espy, who was the Department of Agriculture, I believe, under Clinton.
Our Tyson chicken situation, I think.
Yeah, there was some. Yeah, Tyson chicken. I don't remember all the details. Anyway, he wasn't either. He was acquitted or nothing came of it. But at the time, there was a question of executive privilege because Clinton ordered up his White House counsel at the time to write a report as to what he should do with Mike Espy, apart from criminal charges. And Espy resigned, so nothing came of it. But there was a report, and it was issued publicly, et cetera, et cetera. But the special prosecutor for that particular matter, or the independent counsel to be more accurate, because under that at that time there was an independent counsel statute, asked for more than just the finished product. He wanted drafts, he wanted conversations, he wanted notes. And while the Clinton administration turned over like 99% of stuff, they withheld 84 documents on grounds of executive privilege pursuant to the communications privilege and the deliberative process privilege. And the case went up to the District Court of Appeals, the D.C. Circuit, rather. And the D.C. Circuit had a long and winding opinion in which it said, okay, this is how you're supposed to make these determinations, and we remand for you to follow. Well, what did they say? They said a lot of things about need and what was the reach of Nixon, and is a grand jury different than a trial subpoena?
Yes, okay. This is the question.
There's a lot of stuff, but there's no SB rule that really, frankly, helps the Trump administration at all. One of the key reasons is this: the grand jury investigation of SB was about SB, not Clinton. This investigation is about Trump. And because it's about Trump, his testimony is absolutely critical to an investigation. It's well within the parameters of a grand jury investigation. And frankly, he's the best source for his own recollections and why he did things.
I have questions about that. But yeah, ordinarily that person involved is the best source for recollections, but Trump's probably the worst source for recollections of any kind.
He's a liar, but that's a different issue.
That is true.
And the point is, there is no SB rule that helps them, and it was almost a laughable argument. And it was just brought home. Do you think that Bob Mueller has the right to ask Donald Trump about the telephone call involving Hope Hicks and Mark Caralla that he was on?
Yeah.
Of course. So what are you talking about, Ty Cobb? I mean, what do you? It's crazy.
I don't know.
Or John Dowd, whoever's making these silly statements. You're really going to sit here and argue that's presidential privilege because he's deliberating how to obstruct justice? It doesn't work, my friend.
Smoke bomb. At this point, you just say something in legalese to reporters. Reporters report it, and if you make it to the weekend, cool.
Yeah, and what's funny is on this deliberative process and even communication privilege, the White House released the Rod Rosenstein memo on the Comey firing.
Yes.
They waived privilege.
Yeah, it comes and goes as they see fit. Gimme-tarian approach to these high principles.
You do get to waive it, but you can't just, you can't sword and shield it, as they say. Mm-hmm. So I think that Mueller will certainly look. Trump can invoke the Fifth Amendment and not talk to anybody.
Yes,
but he'll have to do it, and that's what they're saying. Well, I'm not agreeing to it. All right. Well, here's my subpoena. Oh, well, I'm going to challenge the subpoena. Okay, let's go to court and let's challenge the subpoena. And the district court's going to rule against Trump. He's going to take an appeal. The circuit court's going to rule against Trump. He takes another appeal. The Supreme Court. What's the Supreme Court going to do, David?
Yeah, good question. But suppose they do rule against him. Then he
says, well, I don't care. I'm still not going.
Right. I mean, by the way, just another story we'll just squeeze in quickly. Up in Pennsylvania, where the state Supreme Court insisted that the legislative boundaries had to be redrawn, and they had to be redrawn prior to the next election because they were unconstitutionally configured in the first place. And I don't remember which of the officials.
State Senate pro tempore, president of the Senate pro tempore.
Right. Basically just did the, how many divisions does the state Supreme Court have? I'm not redrawing it. You're wrong. I think you decided the case wrongly, and so therefore I'm just not going to do it. And state constitutional crisis there, everybody.
Amazing.
Call out the militia.
And a law firm sent the letter. Which was remarkable to me. I said, you know what? You want that? Send that letter to the state Supreme Court. You put it on your letterhead.
Yeah, right.
I'm not sending that letter. It's frankly a remarkable document. My understanding is that it's not even particularly an issue in that the assembly already sent the same information.
Oh,
so
all right.
It wasn't really a big deal. But, I know what you're saying is about drawing the lines. And, they say, we can't draw the lines.
Right.
You haven't given us guidance. I do think there's a fair point to be made here is the Supreme Court needs to issue their opinion, which they have not. They only issued the order. They really do need to issue their opinion, and they should probably get it out like now. Not to be fair, but I will be fair that they should issue their opinion. I mean, they should be working night and day.
Yeah, give the Supreme Court or the Senate President pro tem the opportunity to say, "Oh, you mean this gate key?" Yes. Okay. We'll redraw those lines now that you've issued your opinion.
Right, and I think the real worry is that they will stay this decision by the state Supreme Court. Because it went to Alito, and Alito asked for briefing, and but he hasn't issued the stay. So the reality is, the Senate of Pennsylvania is on no ground here to tell the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania they're not going to do it. Until there's a stay, that order is on you. Yeah. But as you said, the issue is how many divisions do you have? Well, this is now the question of Louise Mensch time. The marshal of the Supreme Court
That's true.
To go arrest Donald Trump and bring him before the grand jury.
Sure. Why not? I say, or in 2018, when we win back the House and Senate, we can place him under inherent contempt arrest.
I think we're making jokes, but we're not.
Yeah.
Because Donald Trump follows no norms.
Right.
There literally is nothing he will not do.
Let me use the remaining minutes to inject one or two other norms that were smashed in the last couple of days. One on the record, one open to question, and a little more esoteric. The open and obvious one, apparently now being reported that in addition to asking Comey for loyalty, in addition to asking McCabe for loyalty, apparently he's also done the same with Rosenstein, asked him in so many words, are you on my team?
My team.
On my team. Team. He says he's walking behind him with a baseball bat. Wants to know if he's on this team or are you out there for yourself? That's
Great
out there
image.
now too.
Absolutely.
And one other thing, the more questionable, because I don't really know what the source is on this, and we haven't heard a damn thing about this, and you're never likely to either. But an interesting tweet that crossed my virtual desk from Olga Lautman in New York City. Apparently something of, like the rest of us, an amateur Trumpologist and Russologist. It's no longer a Sovietologist. But here's something. I want to put this one out there in advance of the weekend, even though we've got another day to do it. She's got some translated Russian newspapers. Don't know how far you can trust those things. But basically, in addition to refusing the deadline to impose sanctions, as Donald Trump did the other day, there are sanctions violations alleged to be ongoing, one including the, I guess, prohibited under the sanctions, importation of Russian natural gas. Apparently, we're not supposed to be taking that shipment and sending our cash to Russia in exchange, and so they are transferring Russian-mined gas to, I guess, third-party flagged tankers and unloading them in port in Boston as we speak, in violation. I mean, that would be like straight up violation of sanctions already in place, not ones that Trump has refused to impose, but ones already placed and a matter of law. And we're transferring cash to Russia again.
You know who used to do that?
Who?
With Iran sanctions, Halliburton under Dick Cheney.
Oh, yeah. Huh? Oh, well, he's learning from the worst. So, okay. Anyway, we'll have to investigate some more about that and see if we can get some other independent verification.
There was another breach of the sanctions.
Early tip. Yeah.
There was another breach of the sanctions a few days ago, which was that the three intelligence service officials who met with Mike Pompeo, I believe one of them was on the prohibited list to come into the United States.
Yes, that's right. Another of the, and it's true. And I've got that one pocketed away too, and I'll see if we can't come up with his name. But I'll have to insert it over the music as we exit here. But just a number of ongoing violations of existing sanctions, not to mention the ones he's refused to impose despite the overwhelming vote for it. So you got yet another constitutional crisis bubbling up
Can I just say one last thing?
Yeah.
Ben Carson picked a good day to just do run-of-the-mill graft.
Yeah, right.
Very smart.
Today would be, I think, was it David Korn tweets this almost every day, but every time there's an explosive crisis, today would be a good day for Trump to release his taxes.
It would be.
Might be true. All right. Thanks, Armando, for catching us up on
Dave.
that legal nuance. We'll talk to you again. Probably, well, if you're available tomorrow, we'll be back on this subject, no doubt. So if not, don't worry about it. Take care. It's time for our music to play us out here. There's a couple of other things, too, that we really ought to try and squeeze in here, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it. Oh, yes. We'll just note for the record, former Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour arrested the other day with a forgotten gun in his carry-on luggage, or I don't know, in his briefcase at the airport in Jackson, Mississippi. So he joins the Sebastian Gorka wall of shame, I guess, hall of shame in trying to bring a gun with him on board an airliner. Let's see. Oh, yes. And in addition to the whole sanctions thing, we got more on the sanctions and how Donald Trump even cheated on the 11:50 p.m. issuance of a list of oligarchs to be excluded from the United States as well. Not that that matters, because Armando just mentioned the prohibited list is pretty porous as it is. All right, we'll be back tomorrow. We can catch up with more things. It is now time to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Here's what they got on tap. Here we are. He'll cover this story for you in depth. Russia's top spy is on the U.S. sanctions list. He's not supposed to be allowed into the United States without special permission, and, well, he's listed on the Department of Treasury's blocked person list. So what was he doing in D.C. last week?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
There's more, of course. The congressional staffer who drafted the controversial Nunes memo was once bench slapped by a federal judge for ineptitude. U.S. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin urged Congress to raise the debt ceiling as another shutdown looms. You heard a little bit about that. And, of course, more on the Pennsylvania State Senate president after this.